Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/slash Tales from Tech Support. In today's episode, you fixed it, therefore you broke it. Or, the change freeze that broke my FTP server. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. You fixed it, therefore you broke it. Or, the change freeze that broke my FTP server. Hi TFST, FTP, etc. Let me regale you with a story of FTP woe and the change freeze that wasn't. Cast. $me, yours truly, Digital Plumber NZ, at the time lead system admin for $employer, well versed in the ways of firewalls and networks and related services. $colleague. A colleague and friend, not as good with networking but far better with the 8th layer of the OSI model. $data source, a client that sent $employer globs of financial transaction data, said data being used by $employer for other service offerings, so their receipt was business critical. $employer, an analytics consultancy. $rm, client relationship manager at $employer responsible for the $data source relationship. $RM had a grudge from the time 2 years previous that I overshot a delivery deadline by 3 hours. $0000FF, $data source outsourced IT vendor. Important detail, the files from $data source to $employer were sent via active FTP. It was over IPsec VPN, before anyone does what I did when I first found out that it was classic FTP and freaks the heck out. The November before this took place, we'd migrated every client that sent/received data across to a new server that only had SFTP enabled. Every client, that is, except $data source, whose relevant manager had announced to us after the cutover date, when they suddenly couldn't connect, that, actually, he never agreed to moving to SFTP, and the change he'd approved was just altering the endpoint to use the new server's IP address. Much rage emanated from my desk that day. But business need overrode technical purity, and so pro-FTPD sullied my beautiful CentOS box. This entire story would not have happened if the SFTP cutover had been total and final. One early January Thursday, whilst I was on holiday and still recovering from management's distinctly questionable decision to have us move into a new office that was still being built out literally the week before Christmas, maybe a story for another day, colleague sent me an IM. Hey, sorry to bug you on holiday, $me, but the data files from $data source have been empty since Tuesday. Looks like they're connecting because the files are being created, but there's zero length. Could you please do the needful and check the firewall logs? Implicit in $colleague's request was I hate trying to interpret the firewall logs, despite pfSense having a pretty nice UI for the task. I dutifully logged into the firewall and checked the logs, ensured the appropriate rules were logging, and confirmed that, yes, they were indeed doing the needful at the FTP session layer. $me, it all looks fine. pfSense logs say they're getting connected, and as you say the files are being created. Could be something funky with FTP. They changed anything? Colleague, well, they're proclaiming change freeze, of course. But I spoke with someone from $0000FF who said that on deep background, and totally deniably as far as $data source is concerned, they'd made an emergency change to the network. Nothing to do with $data source though. Note, down here in the antipodes our change freeze periods often commence mid-November, at latest early in December, and are mostly not lifted until the second week of January when most of the workforce is expected back from Christmas holidays. As $data source is in retail financial services, their change freeze was longer than many to avoid disrupting their customers' Christmas shopping. Crying change freeze to deflect allegations of complicity was entirely plausible had it not been for the side comment, which of course was never going to be relayed to $data source because, well, it couldn't possibly have been related. We never did find out what was changed, either. We had very definitely not changed anything, because nobody except me would touch the firewall or the transfer server except in the event of an unscheduled outage, and I had been on holiday since right before Christmas. $Me, well, something is rotten in the state of $data source, but it's the first week of January and I care not to do more diagnosis. It ain't the firewall, so if you figure it out, awesome, and if not, it'll still be broken on Monday. My big barrel of fornications, TM, is empty. I'm going back to dad on holiday mode. I wasn't just being cavalier. Early January was pretty quiet and nothing going on needed to the day data at that time. They'd already got 2 consecutive 60 to 70 hour weeks from me with the move. Come Monday, it had been a consistent barrage of empty files over the previous nights. Something was well awry, and it fell to your intrepid narrator to go glitch hunting. First stop was to get a contact in the department of $data source that generated the data files, so I could have them retransmitted on demand. Figuring that SE Linux is the bane of many an admin, and wondering if something had somehow changed about how they were sending the files, I set SE Linux to permissive and restarted Pro FTPD, then asked the contact for a retransmit. Empty file, nothing in audit.log, one potential scratched off the list. Next, check for updates. Nope, nothing coming down, and no yum update run since before Christmas. Not a recently patched bug, and not a new bug. Next, cause scratched. Wanting to verify that their user could actually upload content, I FTP'd in. Do not ask me why the previous system admin kept a record of every client's password, but that day I was thankful he had, as $data source, and uploaded a file. And another, and another. Then I punched the necessary holes in the firewall, and did the same from a box totally off our network. Active FTP, passive FTP, SFTP, totally unable to reproduce the issue. Every single file transferred successfully, and hashed the same at both ends, at sizes from a couple of MB to hundreds of MB. This issue was specific to files sent by $data source, not replicable as their user, and not affecting any of the other 24 clients uploading files via SFTP to this server. By now, $RM was also back from holiday and demanding to know what was wrong. I showed her the modification timestamps on the Pro FTPD config files, dated early December. I showed her that the Pro FTPD binaries were dated at the time of it being installed prior to Christmas. I showed her the login logs from the transfer server, again showing nothing since before Christmas, and then after we got notified. I showed her the admin login logs from the firewall, from the last day that I worked in December, and then none until after we got notified of the error. To me it was pretty clear that this was not down to a change performed by us, and she seemed to accept that. Her feathers apparently somewhat smoothed, I went back to diagnosis. Getting stuck for possibilities, I turned the debug up to 11 and also fired up Wireshark. Turns out that even with all of the debug turned on, Pro FTPD is not very verbose about what's happening with transactions, but hooray for plain text connections. Some more transfers from my off-net box got a baseline for normal, so then I requested another transfer from $data source. Looking through the packet captures, what became obvious was that the $data source server was not setting up the data channel. The control channel came up, the store command came through, hence the empty file, but the connection back from our transfer server to the $data source server for the data channel didn't get established. Background: for those not familiar with the intricacies of FTP, you lucky people, for reasons buried in the depths of time, it uses 2 TCP connections, one for control, initiated by the client to TCP/21 on the server, one for data transfer, initiated by the server to from TCP/20 to a random port on advised by the client. That is known as active FTP, and is the original standard. For many reasons, allowing a client computer to accept inbound connections makes many levels of IT administrator uncomfortable, so passive FTP was introduced with the server listening on, and then advising the client of an arbitrary port in TCP/1024-65535 to connect to establish the data channel. Still 2 channels, one for control and one for data, but with both connections initiated by the client to the server. With $0000FF's assistance useless, the network guys and the mainframe guys are separate teams, and neither could initiate a transfer or monitor logs all the way through. I was left with radical surgery: replace Pro FTPD. The other common FTP server software in use on Linux is FTPD, so I disabled Pro FTPD and did the needful. After confirming that I could send files with active FTP as the $data source user, I asked my contact to initiate a transfer. And, Sunnava B*TCH, it worked. So did the next one. Then I turned Pro FTPD back on instead, and the transfer failed. Back to FTPD, and the transfer worked again. So did that night's transfers. It all looked the same with Wireshark, but something was glitchy when it came to Pro FTPD and the $data source server. Never did figure out what, either, but it kept on working through the coming year, and as best I'm aware continues to work. Epilogue: the following day, when we'd had successful overnight transfers and the ticket from $data source was closed, I was talking to $RM in the office kitchen. $me, that was bloody weird. No idea what went wrong, but I was not confident that I was going to get it fixed. $RM, yeah, I didn't have any confidence that you could fix it either. At least you figured out what you'd done to break it walks away.